Everybody talks about the economy, and the economy is a huge, huge piece that you can never underestimate. And so we have been living in a world of this post-World War II economy that has been really good for a lot of people in the United States. So let's talk about the economy after 1945. Get ready, because here we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at, right, is going to be, I really go to like 1945 to 1980. And the reason why I do that is because everything really changed with Ronald Reagan and his the policy of trickle-down economics. It changed the corporate tax structure, and it really took the hands of the people out of the money that they were getting, and it really started moving it towards the very wealthy. And they had their reasons for that. So, and that's another discussion for another day. But let's talk about right after World War II. What happened, right? So what happened is you had 15 million vets. Right? These 15 million vets were coming back from World War II. They were seen as heroes, and they were going to have to get back into the job force. Okay, ladies, you're out. And so a lot of the women that were in the factories, hey, thanks a lot, but we're not going to be needing your services anymore. And that moved the men into a lot of those positions and women back to traditional house roles during the 1950s. Now, here's the thing. You have to know the GI Bill, because with the GI Bill, it does two things. One, it allowed education, like college education, for these GIs that came home, which is actually still available today. You know, there are people out there that are actually, going to college, and really, what they're worried about is, if they go there 4 years, then they're able to have the military pay for the college. Great deal. Now, the other thing that it did that really, really helped the economy is it gave low-cost loans. And those low-cost loans were actually for housing that they were used it for. So what happened is you had this huge growth of houses, huge, okay? And so, we're gonna talk a little bit about that. Now, you're talking $16 billion worth of loans that were put out there. That's a lot of money. And so that ends up, right? They come home, they start building homes, they get their jobs back. And so this begins the beginning of building of homes called Levittowns. These Levittowns were built by a builder named Levitt, which basically used a reverse assembly line, right? Instead of the products moving by the people and doing the work as the products go by, like Henry Ford did, what they did is they brought the products to one place and they moved the people around to do each job to build the homes. Same kind of idea. But in the end, what it did was it helped all these guys get into homes. Well, what did they do when they were married? They were in their homes and they had their jobs, so they started having babies. And you can welcome the baby boomers. All right, so it's between 1945 and 1960, 50 million babies were born. All right, and this changed the economy in so many ways. Now you had men working, women at home, nuclear families that were being done, and it's the growth of the suburbs, right? Levittowns popping up on the East Coast, starting in Long Island and in New York. Now, there was a second part, the rise of the Sun Belt, okay? Now, what were some of these jobs, okay? The rise of the Sun Belt happened because there was, the installation of air conditioning into buildings. So huge, huge boom. By putting air conditioning, you could live in places like Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, etc. Texas, hot, okay? But then you had other industries that were growing, like the car industry, the aerospace industry. Credit cards started coming into being. So there was all kinds of these different types of businesses that were helping this economy move in that direction, okay? Now, with the suburbs, one of the things that made that happen, right, was the Interstate Highway Act. And that was done by Dwight Eisenhower. I call him General Eisenhower because that's what he was. He was the general. And so he got that inspiration from the Autobahn when he was a general in Germany. And he says, wow, the way these roads work together and how fast they could move things, it was great. He built that interstate highway system so that it could be an evacuation route, God forbid, right, if we had a nuclear attack on us. But here's the thing. This is the thing that's unbelievable. Just heard something. Did you hear that? Anyway, what he did is he put this Interstate Highway Act together, right? And with that being said, that Interstate Highway Act connected not just this, it connected the different cities across the nation. So all of a sudden, you know, I've got fish frozen fish I want to pick up in California and LA, and I want to get it to Boston. I can do that in 4 days now on a truck. Game changer when it came to building that economy. Okay, trucking became a huge part of the industry. It was the way things got delivered all over the United States, right? And then that helped create these suburbs, right? That it's all working in congruence. Those suburbs and those Levittowns. Now people were moving out of the cities, right? They were moving out of the cities into these suburb areas. Now, here's the thing. This begins the idea of white flight. Okay. Now, white flight, where, you know, basically the people that were left in the cities were the black and brown people. And so as white people continued to move out of the suburbs. Well, why were white people moving to the suburbs? Great question. That is because in the GI Bill, the African-American men did not have equal access to the loans because the loans were still processed through the banks, right? And because those banks were not wanting to give loans to the African Americans, they did not see that prosperity through the GI Bill as their white counterparts did. Also, in return, you have to think about a lot of colleges. You know, if there were a lot of African Americans that were living in the South, it was harder for them to go to school because of Jim Crow. There was no desegregation of the schools and the colleges until James Meredith, I believe it was 1961 in Ole Miss. And so they didn't have the opportunity, so they couldn't share in that same wealth. So during that 1950s, during that time, white males made 50% more than their African American counterparts. And so there was a lot of inequity when it came to this time period. It was really, really tough for them. But again, the biggest thing is you had huge, huge economic growth, okay? You had Eisenhower, he even cut the budget for the military to make all this happen. You had, during the 1950s, a high rate of taxation on corporations, but yet you still had one of the best economic times that the United States has seen. And so now, because of all those soldiers with those homes in those Levittowns, they were creating lots of babies. Now you got your boomers. 50 million babies. I can't believe that's just a huge, huge, huge number. But it changed. And that group got all the wealth, all the affluence, all right? Started the idea of conformity within the United States, more expectation of colleges, et cetera. So there was a lot going on within this growth of this post-World War II. Now, this continued into the 1960s. It slowed down in the 1970s under Nixon and Carter and Ford with the stagflation. We'll get to that a little bit later, leading into the 1980s when there was a big change with trickle-down economics. But the post-World War II economy was the greatest economy that the United States had had over a long period, putting lots of wealth into middle-class people, opening college education, homes to be built, and jobs that were there for the people after World War II. Peace.